den rechten.
bir müşteri olan
rechten Teil an der Nordseite.
Moving forward.
Quand on a préparé avec Francis Bossier cette table ronde,
when Francis and I prepared this, we felt that turning to you, innocent Chirisa, we felt that these are the true poor people in Africa, and that of course, will give a totally new dimension to the concept of poverty, because you have people living in precarious conditions in France, but in Africa it's another story altogether, isn't it? It's another order of magnitude, and will be of great interest to listen to talk about another kind of poverty than the one you have in France and Europe. So you have the floor. Do press the green microphone. Beg your pardon. Do press the green remote control.
Changer de slide.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm coming from a totally different context, as has been highlighted. And Zimbabwe is a country in sub-Saharan Africa where really poverty, in terms of income poverty, energy poverty, housing poverty, etc., is really an issue. So I'm going to say, how do the poor survive in the peri-urban, and how do they meet their energy and the transport needs? As you can see from that picture, that's typical of a household member who is trying to survive. What you see in that cart is a log. When I asked him, how much does it cost? You know, I'm interviewing him there. He tells me it costs $4, and you know, this is just too little for survival. Right. The purpose of this paper, really, or of this presentation, is to demonstrate how peri-urban dwellers sustain themselves for energy provision. And I applied the interpretive inductive approach to try and understand the peri-urban energy dynamics among the poor in most households. And the case which I give is Zimbabwe in sub-Saharan Africa, in the global south. And overall, the study is it considers the chaotic energy situation in a place called Epworth, which is just outside Harare, the capital city of Zimbabwe. Just to put certain things in context, Zimbabwe is a country which has 10 provinces, of which the 2 of them are metropolitan, that is Harare and Bulawayo. And it has a population of about 13 million, according to the recent census, which was carried out in 2012. Now, the country has a serious problem of urban primacy. We have the population in the country lives in Harare, that is about 4.5 million, lives in Greater Harare. We should also draw to your attention that from 1997 to 2008, there was a serious economic and political crisis in the country, which stemmed from the controversial land reform which the country embarked on. Again, in 2005, the government demolished households and businesses operating outside the formal framework through an operation that was called Operation Murambatsvina, that is take away the filthy. And this inflation which I talked about, it really peaked in 2008, thanks to the government of national unity, which came in office in 2009. Like in most sub-Saharan countries, really peri-urbanization is a complex and obtaining reality. I would briefly talk about Greater Harare region, which includes places like Rua, Chitungwiza, then Harare Core, Epworth, and Norton. So Epworth is one of the settlements in the peri-urban of Harare. and that is just a map of what we call the Greater Harare. The yellow part there shows the central part of the city, and then it's surrounded by several human settlements which are of different characteristics. Some are middle income, high income, low income, but the Epworth, which I'm zeroing in, is a low income, low density residential area. About Epworth, this settlement began as far back as 1892. You know, Harare, or Zimbabwe, was colonized by Britain in 1890. So, and established a capital which became Harare. But just some 9 kilometers away, they made this settlement called Epworth. And recent estimates, they say the population in 2010 it was estimated to be around 500,000. Then by 2012, there's an estimate that it has grown to about 700,000. And as you can see, that's growing to be really a menace, almost becoming a mega settlement. And one thing which you know to note is that 70% of Epworth dwellers are not connected to the electricity grid, and you really would wonder how do they survive. Well, that is Epworth. It has 7 wards. Now about peri-urban mobility and energy in the settlement. As I have indicated, it's really a complex reality. And like most countries where governments are obsessed with other policy agendas and they don't really put peri-urban areas as a priority, the same applies to this kind of settlement. The majority of dwellers in Epworth are low-income earners, surviving mainly from less than $2 a day, and activities are mainly in the informal sector because unemployment in Zimbabwe at the moment is around 70%. And as such, most have to find ways to self-employ, or it's a do or die situation. In the rural areas, again, where the farms have been seized from the white farmers, you know, it becomes very unlivable. So normally they come to Harare, and then they find that the cost of living in the city is too high for them. Then they decide to resettle in the peri-urban, and that explains why Epworth is swelling, is growing. Now, there were efforts in the 1980s. You know, Zimbabwe got its independence in 1980. So in the 1980s, around 1986, there were efforts to upgrade part of this informal settlement called Epworth, which was soon to be abandoned because around 1990, the government embarked on what is called the Structural Economic Adjustment Program. And this meant that very few effort or very little effort should be put towards the public sector investment. So the upgrading program was abandoned. So in the upgraded part of Epworth, which I can put as just 1/7 of the settlement, that's where we find a bit of grid electricity. Now, because of that, they've found new ways to have their energy, and one way is to use sawdust, which they get from nearby sawmill industries around Harare and around Rua, and they have to transport that sawdust. in a few moments, I will show you the slide how they sometimes use it. But also, you see that they use firewood, which they get mainly from nearby farms, and some of the farms are really far off. Sometimes more than 100 kilometers away, and private transporters, bulk transporters. When I interviewed one of them, they said, well, sometimes it costs them around $600 or $700 to both buy the logs and transport them to airport. Some alternative methods to have energy include use of plastics, solar, paraffin, diesel for generators. So as I indicated, that photograph on the left corner, it shows part of the settlement, which is the electricity grid, but as you can see, it's not even well maintained, and some pylons are as if they are already falling. And they bring these logs from the farms, and then they have to cut it. You know, that gentleman there is trying to cut it into pieces, which are then sold around 50 cents, and that's how the poor. But getting 50 cents is not. It's quite a task, and they normally take one of those split logs, and what you see there is some kind of a technology which they've put. It's sawdust, which they put in a container, suppress it, make a hole, just use some firewood, just a little firewood. So they have to be to reserve quite their energy, but they say once they have that kind of arrangement, they can cook for the night, and they have a meal. And when we look at what it exhibits, it shows a number of interesting and critical patterns and dynamics of how individuals and households move their goods from one point to the other. And mobility can be mapped at two levels: intra-settlement and inter-settlement. What do these households do? How do they move about within the settlement? You know, as I indicated to you, most depend on informal livelihoods, like peri-urban agriculture, like trading in the street. So there are movements within the settlement, trading, going to get some firewood in the woodlots around, which are, of course, are diminishing, and that's why they have to resort to further settlements. Then inter-settlement patterns include movement to the big city, which is Harare, some 9 kilometers away, sometimes to get the plastics, which I said, to do some PC jobs, as they are called. The movement, which involves trucking, actually is also part of the inter-settlement, where logs are brought into the settlement. Some of the inter-settlement patterns, inter-settlement mobility, it involves moving about very long distances, like Mvuma bringing in firewood or maize in times when there are droughts, to name a few of these. Right. You'd also find that some of the dwellers in Epworth, they also find employment in other parts of the city, places like Mount Pleasant, Greendale, Hatfield. These are high-income areas where some work as security guards, others work as domestic workers there, and then they travel back to their home of habitation. But we should also see that, there's Some commuter omnibuses as one avenue through which these people get to work. Others cycle, others really walk, and walking is considered as cost saving. Spending money. Someone would rather waste his body than spend the dollar or 50 cents that he or she finds. Some within the settlement, they use things like wheelbarrows, and as I mentioned, high trucks are hired in bringing bulk loads of wood logs, which are then sawn to produce small pieces of wood that is now turned into firewood. What are some of the lessons? Well, the environment around Epworth, as I've indicated, this settlement started as far back as 1892, so it's more than a century now, and you can imagine what the situation is like now. What used to be huge forests, now they are depleted, and energy becomes a really critical issue. But we should also note how the informal sector is playing a key role in providing energy for domestic use. In terms of how households organize themselves, we see mainly getting firewood, say from the market or from the wood lot, is mainly a women business. This is how culture in our place is defined. It's as a highly patriarchal society. It's women who do the household chores, collecting firewood, fetching water, and the like. What would I recommend? For recommendations, there are issues to do with social mobilization around dissolving issues of gender, so that women also are relieved of these duties, or at least the duties of carrying wood or firewood are distributed between men and women almost equally. The government or the local authorities should find sustainable ways of providing energy for these settlements. There may be need for private-public partnerships in ensuring that there are decent energies in Epworth, just like any other peri-urban area in Africa, because employment is really a critical issue, and it's not there. Well, the informal sector should be really modeled so that there's capacity building and improved provisioning of energy. There's also a need to harness local energy in the formulation of local knowledge in the formulation of robust energy provision mechanisms, which is quite a rather a mouthful thing. Generally, in Epworth, as perhaps in most peri-urban areas in Africa or in Zimbabwe, the issue of carrying capacity is a critical issue. As I mentioned, the settlement is growing demographically, and it's a very speed rate, and really relying on natural resources in its own right. It's unsustainable. How do matters of carrying capacity and this growth, how can they be measured? That's a 1 million question. Also consideration of use of modes of transport, new forms of energy from industrial byproducts, depicting necessity as the mother of invention. So basically, this is my story, where the issues of sustainability, the issues of resource depletion, the issue of increasing growth. Africa is one of the fastest urbanizing regions in the world today, and it's faced with such surmountable challenges. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Innocent Chirisa. That was very interesting. Personally, Francis Bossier, what really struck me trying to connect that with what was said earlier, in France, energy is a resource for mobility. You try to cut your mobility to save on energy, whereas in Zimbabwe, or at least in Epworth, mobility is driven by the quest for energy. You move around to get energy. Francis Bossier, what do you think of that? Yes, it was very nice saying that. No, that's very interesting. Really. Necessity is the mother of invention. That's what you said. Necessity is the mother of invention. Well, when you hear what's just been said, well, first of all, I would like to ask you a question. Since this morning, we've been saying, oh my God, connections between trains are sometimes a bit late. The bus left the station 5 before the train arrived. The people who don't have a lot of money in the Peri-urban, well, maybe instead of visiting Volvicon Castle with their car on a Sunday, will stay and have a barbecue at home. What's your take on all that? Because after the presentation that you've just made, we can see that we're living on different planets. The scale of the problems is completely different, but I think that there's a connection between the problems. Necessity produces inventions that are not necessarily institutional, but since this morning you've been hearing about our own problems, which seem very big for us. But maybe you can tell us something about what you've been hearing since this morning.
I would say what you are experiencing here, if you would put someone from Africa in this context, he or she would think, well, they are already in heaven. Because the challenge is there, well, I mentioned employment is really a big issue. And whatever is got as income, as a dollar, try as much as possible to save it. But at one's own expense, bodily, and the like. So, well, your challenges in this part of the world, I think if you give them to an African, they will really smile and say, well, these are not challenges, they are really a big opportunity, at least to venture and well, it's really a luxurious situation. But I should also say, well, they've learned to live or adapted to live with that situation. And when you read or in some discourses, you would really see that some scholars, they even think, well, they are so content with the situation as it is. But I think it's also a question of exposure, because they've never, quite a number have never experienced this. They don't know how a tram really works, and it's really a different environment, a different one.
Francis Bossier, are you happy with the answer? Yes, quite. I mean, that's what everyone expects. But what I take home from that for SNCF is that if there were more African travelers, that would be heaven for SNCF. That's interesting. Anyway. But coming back to the parallel, I mean, the point of having that presentation in the roundtables that we've had is to show that if we completely refocus our issues, trying to see whether there are similarities. It seems that there are no apparent similarities, but still, here we heard about people who are transforming their lifestyles marginally in order to absorb new constraints that did not exist previously in the case that we're looking at right now, energy constraints. What we're seeing in the presentation that you made is that the people that we saw, the people that you talked about, spend an awful lot of time for survival, subsistence activities. Just for the household to survive, they need to spend all that time. But increases productivity gains in developed countries mean that all the time that you spent on survival activities has been cut down. And that's why you could produce to sell and export. And here, I'm transposing things. These scales are not the same, but if you transpose things, the price of energy for humble households in the peri-urban, that's a mobility problem. I mean, they can make do at home. But if the ingenuity that they need to show in order to absorb future increases in energy costs that will really challenge their lifestyles, well, they'll probably spend more time implementing new, inventive, innovative strategies to substitute these energy sources. And here we're talking about a level, price level again. At what level of fiscal disruption will the peri-urban lifestyle be compromised? I think that there are still some considerable room ahead of us, and that explains why so far peri-urban areas are not doomed. The peri-urban momentum has not stopped. It may not grow so fast, and I'm not even sure about that. That depends on the places, but I think that there's still some way to go. That may not be true. So I think that the parallel between that presentation and those that we heard previously, I think the roundtables are pretty well designed. You can give credit to the organizers. And that lets us ask the question of how much extra time should we spend on substitution activities, where we need to be more ingenious and do things ourselves that we used simply to buy. That may be a bit confused what I'm saying, but I mean, getting wood from the forest next door in Seine-et-Marne is not at all anecdotal. However, it's impossible to measure through our quantitative databases. However, qualitative surveys show that households say that they turn off the radiator and they get wood from the nearby forest. It's illegal logging, so they're not going to brag about that. They're not going to talk about that in quantitative studies. However, it does exist. And can you estimate it roughly? Not at all. Not at all. No rough idea. Well, it seems that it's growing. It's a behavior that's growing, that's found in surveys, especially in Seine-et-Marne, getting wood from the nearby forest, be it a private or public forest, but I don't have figures. There are 2 microphones over there. I simply wanted to say something about mobility. There's a strategy that hides other things that have existed for a long time. Households tend to buy cars that are more fuel efficient as the price of oil increases. And so at the end of the day, up until recently, fuel costs were mostly constant for households, and now we've reached a point, we've reached the end of that logic, and I think that now the effort related to automobile costs will have a detrimental impact on household budgets, but I don't know what the threshold is. Yes, to echo your question about the figures that we can put on these informal or even illegal practices, I would refer you to the quantitative survey conducted based on the census by Alter Bourgogne, which is the Burgundy Energy Agency, done in 2007, and I think that based on lower reported energy consumption, they saw the wood effect in some parts of the territory that they surveyed. And it seems that a fraction of the population escaped the energy pressure through illegal logging. And to echo that presentation, the parallel between 2 contexts that challenge our implicit or explicit standards, and that put the debate in a broader societal context about energy consumption. However, in the presentations that we've heard today, several times I saw similarities with areas that I've surveyed, not in France, but in Chile, in Santiago, where the capital city, which is fairly affluent. It's not in the rural areas of Chile, but you can find the same tensions. People don't live in the central city, they live on the outskirts, and so the alternative solutions are for them being involved in informal work and following things that are based on the family nucleus, trying to live near their family members. And people try to invest in local resources, or they invest in mobility. And I was not familiar with the case of Zimbabwe, but there's a survey that was done by people from the Transport Economics Laboratory in Africa that shows these tensions. And it seems that the local informal setup helps people reach lower income levels than having better skills and having a job and having to walk for several hours because they don't have a choice. But the situations are similar to what Rodolphe Daudier showed. Innocent Chirisa, before your answer to Yves Jouffre, maybe we can look at a tweet for you. It seems that there are 50 people watching us live, and this is a question for you. Are there examples of innovation by new urbanites? How to use local knowledge to enhance energy provision?
Well, it's written, are there examples of innovation by the new urbanites? How to use local energy for robust energy provision? Yeah, like I indicated in my presentation, so that they don't really every time spend much money on firewood. They use together the firewood plus the sawdust, and the firewood is just to when you put a log in a burning log in a sort of in a tin, and then it keeps the sawdust that is compressed burning, and that way maybe a household would have used about 50 cents to cook its entire meal for dinner. That is a kind of innovation which the poor have devised. Of course, there were complaints that with the heat becomes so much, and it erodes the bases of the pots. But that's one way which I can say they have tried to, as much as possible, conserve, use little on energy. Of course, that has its own challenges, which I think, like use of charcoal, coal. I don't know what type of diseases then arises. Smoke is used in closed environments, but in terms of innovation, and particularly in Epworth, that's what I know the poor have been have tried to do. Then the use of local energy to have robust, the local energy knowledge which I will talk about is knowledge from the rural. What, these people are mainly people who have been in the rural areas. They have been relying on forests. And this is the kind of provision or the kind of innovation which they have now brought to the Peri-urban. Remember, I said mostly come from rural areas. They come to the big city, which is Harare. They find the cost of living there, the payment of bills and the like is not sustainable. Then they opt for the Peri-urban. And the kind of knowledge which they have is knowledge from the rural areas. Most perhaps have not really worked in the industries, in urban industries. It's a bit problematic, but I would say it would need further research, contribution of even the academia to see and to advise on how they can improve their even energy and efficiencies. So it's still a gray area, really, very gray. And one thing which I've learned from this is that really, for example, for your own information, my PhD dissertation was focusing on peri-urban areas, and it seems I was talking at something which is a phantasm, something which is out of touch and the like. But then I come to this forum and I realize really it's a serious issue which is not being discussed at home, which means few people are really researching in it. So it would need further research to say, well, how do the local people interpret their situation? What is it that they are using now? How can it be improved? Because as I've mentioned, even in the existing suburbs or in the existing residential areas, which are in the urban areas, there are constant power cuts, and so the energy issue maybe it's not really peculiar to the peri-urban, but also to the broader urban areas, and I would think it's through research, through development, through experimenting with what the poor are trying to do, improving efficiency in what they are ever trying to do, that would really see robustness in energy provision.
Thank you for your answer.
Réponse.
In Rechten.
Italien, Tschechien,